before. I never knew what love was for.
Guys, can I talk about how nice it is to finally read a good book? I don't know if that's a commentary on me or if that is a commentary on literature as a whole, but today's book, which is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, I've read it before. It's been a very long time, but I liked it. But like all books that I read in my past, I was afraid that I wouldn't like this one. It was so thoughtful and clever, and it was quite beautiful. And it made me realize that I want to be the kind of writer who is intelligent. Like, I don't want to be the kind of writer that readers will read because maybe it hits like a sweet spot, but not because it's good writing, but then because this is the kind of content they want, they continue to read content written by authors who write on the same level. And so it's just subpar. I want to be the writer who gives them the content, but also does it in a very sophisticated way. Not that I have to be hoity-toity. I'm not going to write War and Peace here, but I feel like a lot of writers, traditionally published or not, their writing isn't polished. Anyways, today's book is kind of a commentary on death. There are two main characters, Violet Markey and Theodore Finch, and they meet because they are both contemplating suicide. They're both thinking about jumping off the bell tower at their high school. Violet's sister Eleanor, about a year previously, had died in a car accident, and that Theodore, we get this eventually, he is bipolar. I did not pick up on that my first time through. I don't know how I missed it because she's not subtle. I liked the contrast of like the stigma that comes along with suicide versus just a death. I did want more about Eleanor. I didn't know what kind of character she was supposed to be because Theodore's older sister, who I could have used more of, makes a comment about how she thought that Eleanor was a bit full of herself. And then we don't really get a lot about the accident. They'd been at a party. I guess Violet had suggested they take a bridge. It had been winter. We all know bridge ices before the roads, and so they went off the bridge. Did Violet love Eleanor because Eleanor was her sister? But Eleanor maybe wasn't the nicest of people? I wanted more about her because that would have helped me care about her more. And then on that token, I wanted more about the accident. Apparently Theodore, or Finch as people call him, had no idea that Violet had been in this car accident. And I couldn't believe that. I mean, maybe on some level I could have believed he wouldn't have known because he had his own things going on. But I couldn't believe that people wouldn't know that Violet was in a tragic car accident. And on top of that, she apparently sustained no injuries. So I thought that the whole Eleanor's death thing was a little wishy-washy. But on the whole, the book was gorgeous. It reminded me of John Green's The Fault in Our Stars because you didn't expect the character who dies to die. And so in this book, you kind of don't, and spoiler, you kind of don't expect Finch to die. You think that he's getting better, and not that Violet is getting worse, but I didn't expect him to succumb to his mental illness. I thought that Violet would be what he needed to get his way out of this hole, but it's obvious that he had no help. Basically, nobody believed in him, in the fact that he had a problem that needed to be solved. Rather, they just thought that's how Finch is and he'll get through it. Which I thought that was interesting too, because this book, it's been a number of years since it was written. And I feel like it is a sign of the times in that mental health wasn't as big of an issue and as big of a focus as it is now. And so I did think it was interesting to see how there was something wrong with Theodore Finch, but people didn't put much stock in it just by virtue of the fact that you just suck it up. Finch is gonna be Finch, and eventually Finch will come back until Finch doesn't come back, which was its own set of issues for me because I could not believe how many people in his life were not worried about the fact that he up and disappeared. That also goes back to I needed a little bit more insight and development on that rather than just being told in this instance that Finch, like, he'll disappear for a few days. And I guess it was mentioned, but it was more of a passing mention. We meet them on the bell tower. Finch is an outcast. Violet is the popular girl. Finch is the one who actually talks Violet down from the ledge, but Violet is the one giving credit for talking Finch down off the ledge. I wasn't entirely convinced that either one of them was actually going to jump, but that's probably just a preconceived notion of mine and has no bearing whatsoever on the actual writing of the book. They have a history project in which they have to explore their home state of Indiana. Finch, who I enjoyed him, but I didn't always understand his decision-making process. As I said, he's an outcast, but he has the confidence and the balls of somebody who has not been beaten down by life and all of his peers. So there were times that I wasn't sure how I should feel about him, but he's like, I want Violet Markey to be my partner, and she's just like, I don't really want to be your partner, but okay. So they spend the book wandering, and there's really no set rules as to how to do this project. What they choose to do is just to find the unbeaten path, all of the things in Indiana that people may never have found or have seen. Yes, they connect that way. Finch creates a Facebook profile so that he can actually talk with Violet. This is their main form of communication, and we bounce between the two because they both have perspectives. We see Violet trying to move through her old life without knowing or wanting to. And on that note, I found it very hard to believe that her old set of friends would cling to her so tightly. This is not a stereotypical novel, but a lot of the characters are kind of stereotypical of their clique. And for Violet to pull back as much as she seems to have pulled back, she quits student council, she quits cheerleading, like she just is not involved. She breaks up with her boyfriend. I thought it was strange, except for the sake of the novel, that her friends, however many months later, would be like, let's continue to try to get her to hang around with us, or that her ex-boyfriend Ryan would be like, I'm gonna try to get her to date me again. And since we don't know much about him, I can't say it's because he likes her as a person. He doesn't seem like a bad dude, but he does seem like a superficial guy in a lot of ways. I don't see what it is about her that they would want to hold on to and keep in their sect. Her parents are also pushing her to do things. Like, rather than sit in her room and read, they're like, you need to go to this party. And that is where we learn that I guess her sister had been also been dating Ryan's brother. So she'd been dating Ryan, her sister had been dating his brother, which I felt like there was a door cracked open with this whole foursome thing, and I wanted to know more. Like, I think it just goes back to knowing Eleanor and knowing kind of what decisions she's making and the people she's hanging out with, and like, I don't know. Anyways, it's really not a big deal in the long run, but I felt like there was something there, and we were just just missing it. She will not drive. She either walks or she rides her bike. Their first couple wanderings, Finch is like, okay, yeah, we will not take a car. And then there's one that he's like, there's no way we can get there without a car. I won't go fast. You don't have to sit up front. So they make it there. Slowly but surely, he gets her basically back into being in a car until she at some point starts driving herself. And then on his side, we see that he has a very volatile relationship with his father, who had recently left his mother, married this other woman who has a son that may or may not be his. And it's alluded that part of, and this is me not having a firm grasp on bipolar disorder, it's alluded to the fact that his father's physical violence towards Finch had contributed to his having bipolar disorder. While we were told of a couple instances from his upbringing, and we saw a couple instances in the novel, it was one of those things that I wasn't entirely sold on, that his father physically abused him on the regular. Not to say that he hadn't been abusing him, but for me, I felt like I needed more. And then I also did not understand why his father was so different in terms of his old family and his new family, because we are both given the impression that he acts differently, but then we are also shown that he is different. But why? Except for the fact that we needed him to be a bad dude. Like, I wanted more development on him. Like, why would he be so volatile towards his children, but then be so sweet to his new wife and this other kid? Like, I didn't understand why he would change his personality so much, unless it's that honeymoon stage, and so he just hasn't had time to get tired of his new family. One of the things that Finch does is he has these instances in which he falls asleep. He had missed a couple months of school in the prior school year. Basically, he was just in a deep, dark pit and he couldn't get out. He lies about it to everybody. The only person who knows is his sister Kate, who I think she gets more development in the movie, and I kept waiting to figure out, like, where does she keep going? But I liked Kate. I liked the fact that she was a mother figure of sorts for him. She was the one who would cover for him whenever he wasn't able to go to school. But I was just like, but where is she going? And why is she doing this for him? Yet at the end of the book, she's not concerned when he disappears. I also was a little uncertain about the mother, because she does have 2 jobs, so I understand she's a little bit checked out, as well as for the fact that her husband left her. But I needed her to be invested a little bit more in her family. She was definitely one of those absentee parents that we get in a lot of YA novels, although it was counterbalanced with Violet's parents, who were not necessarily helicopter parents, but they were involved parents. They want to know where she was, who she was with, when she was coming home, all that kind of stuff, which makes things interesting in the end, because they are standing in the way of Violet and Finch being together. Once he meets Violet, he is determined to stay awake. And so we have this countdown. So hers is counting down to the end of school. His is counting down every successive day that he is still awake. His goal is essentially to save Violet, is to help Violet get better, which he does. There was a moment that I don't know what happened. I guess I accidentally skipped forward. I guess Finch gets in some kind of altercation with one of the cool guys named Romer, and he gets expelled. It's around the same time that, so he and Violet have begun to date, and I enjoyed their romance so much. It was so different. Like, it was expected. We were hoping they would get together. But at the same time, we didn't have all these cliche moments that you're just like, oh, I know it's gonna happen here. It just evolved until they both liked each other and were like, we wanted to do something about this. So Finch gets expelled. He and Violet are dating. They go on one of their wanderings, I believe, and then they end up at a water tower or something. They're talking about the stars and all these things, and they fall asleep. They don't wake up till the next day, and then Violet gets grounded and forbidden to see Finch. There had already been a moment where her parents were questioning whether or not she should be hanging out with Finch, and he was kind of a pathological liar, convinced them that he was trustworthy and that they could trust Violet with him. And I thought it was an interesting moment because Violet is narrating and she's noting how he's not acting like himself. And that is something that Finch does, is he's, I guess, trying to find himself. So he takes on all these different personas, trying to see which one is the best fit or which one is just a better fit for until he loses interest. And, he tells them that his father had left when he was much younger and that he hadn't seen him since, when obviously he has dinner with him once a week and it had only been a year. And Violet points out all these things that he essentially lied about. And he goes, well, is it really a lie if it feels like it's true to you? And to him, his father had left when he was much younger. His father had checked out much sooner than when he actually physically left. So I thought Niven's just did a really good job at getting deep without it being confusing or overwhelming. Once Finch gets expelled, and this was something I kind of got lost in, he gets lost. And he had kind of slowly but surely shrinking the world around him, or the world in which he lives. So first it starts with painting his room another color. Or actually, I think it starts with he takes all of his stuff and he moves it to one half of his bedroom. Then he paints his bedroom another color. And then he decides, I've got too much stuff. There's too much going on in here. So he packs it all away and he's going to give it away. And then he moves into his closet. And it's here that he and Violet argue, because he goes to a support group for people who've tried to kill themselves. And one of her friends, or pseudo-friends, I still don't understand what's going on there, Amanda, has gone for various reasons. And she then tells Violet, which I don't know why she tells Violet, except Violet's friend group doesn't approve of Finch, but Violet had pulled away anyway, so I don't understand why Amanda wants to stick her nose in it, because she already kind of threatened Finch. She's like, don't tell anybody that you saw me here. So I don't know if it is being proactive, if it's I'm going to beat him to the punch, but Violet then goes to Finch, and I was a little surprised that she had noticed anything sooner. But she hadn't. She confronts him and they get into a really big fight. And this is when he really starts to go downhill. He then disappears and nobody knows where he is. And apart from Violet, nobody cares. Even she contacts the school psychologist, which I thought was interesting, because if I'm looking at it from a rational point of view, I would feel so guilty if I were that psychiatrist or that psychologist, because I'm meeting with this kid on the weekly, and granted, Finch doesn't give much, but then when Finch kills himself, you essentially failed at your job. He was in your care. You were supposed to be looking out for him. And there's this one meeting in which, when Finch and Violet are on the precipice or are actually dating, and Finch is extremely happy, and Embryo as Finch calls him, instead of kind of congratulating him on something good that happened in his life, he makes him doubt the goodness of it. Maybe Violet isn't good for him, or maybe he's going to screw it up. So I thought it was really interesting that we put these little tidbits in there because I don't know if we're trying to make this guy inept, if we're trying to make him uncaring, or if we're just trying to make him into a character who is trying but doesn't know how to try. I have no idea, but that's just one of those elements that gives this book more dimension and depth. So she does get, like, she can't reach anybody at his house. Finally, a psychiatrist does, or a psychologist, or whatever he is. And this is when Violet realizes that nobody's worried. His two closest friends are not worried. His family's not worried. They are just like, this is what he does. So weeks and months pass, and she is doing her best to get over him. And then all of a sudden, he just starts sending her cryptic messages. And then one day, his family does come by, and they're like, have you heard from him? And she's like, no. And in my head, I'm like, you should have listened to me in the first place. Okay, well, let us know if you do. They come by again, and they're like, hey, he sent us this email, and we're really worried because he usually checks in every week, which makes Violet very jealous, rightfully so. She is able to figure out that he went to one of the locations they had wandered to. Actually, I think what she does is first, she goes to his room and she goes into the closet and she deciphers some words that he had on his wall. Eventually, she says, I think I know where he went, and it's this swimming hole, and that's where he ended up drowning himself. I kind of wanted a heavier emphasis on the whole water thing. It is a theme throughout the novel. He's obsessed with death, and he's obsessed with ways of dying, and so I thought maybe if you focused more on water, it would have made more sense that this is the place that he would have ended up all along. From there, Violet decides, like, she still has this project to do. And he had the map. She'd had a notebook in which she had written. That was another thing that she was interested in. She was interested in writing. And then she and Eleanor had a website. And she just let it all go when Eleanor died. But Finch got her re-interested in this again. And she was like, well, I still have to do this project. So she starts traveling to all of these places that they were going to go together. But not until after she goes to the first location and realizes that so it's this place where these trees are just filled with shoes. And she notices a pair of Finch's shoes. And then this reminds her of one of the text messages he'd sent her. And this is when she realizes all of his texts correlate to places that he'd been and were places that they had planned on going. She kind of follows in his footsteps, basically hoping to find something from him, hoping for him to have left something for her. And while she doesn't get anything concrete, she does start to heal, which I gotta say, losing your boyfriend and your sister in about the course of a year, like, I don't know if I could survive that. That's a lot. Especially, like, she had such a deep depression with her sister. And then the next person to mean that much to her dies as well. And at his own hand, I was like, whoa. She finally gets to the last location, which is not somewhere that had been on their destination list. And it turns out to be like this church, this shrine dedicated to people who were in car accidents or who had died in car accidents, which then ties everything back to Eleanor. And here is where she finds a letter from Finch, who she'd been pretty angry at when he disappeared, because she's like, if I was supposed to mean so much to you, how could you just disappear on me? He tells her that she was everything, that she gave him a sense of purpose and made him feel special and loved in a way he never had. So not only did we tie it back to Eleanor, we then just tied it back to their relationship. We're wrapping up the book, and she's basically like, I don't know if I can ever really get past all of this, but we'll find out. That's about it for the book. It was super clever. I will say, I liked Violet's narrator, and it's not that I disliked Finch's narrator, but it's the same guy who narrated the Miss Peregrine series, And he has this really interesting, kind of stilted, dry cadence to his voice. He got better as the book went on, but at the same time, I would have preferred a little more emotion, a little less distance, which, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Finch is very detached. He has a lot of issues going on. It's hard to understand unless you hear the way that this guy narrates. So he is not my favorite narrator. I can handle him for Miss Peregrine, but it's also one of those things that anytime I hear him, I'm going to associate him with that series, and it's just not going to work out because all of his voices are gonna sound just like those in Miss. It's just like when I read The Night Circus, or I listened to The Night Circus. That narrator is the same guy who narrated the American versions of Harry Potter, and I didn't care for The Night Circus because I don't like literary fiction, but everything I heard was Dumbledore or Hagrid, or like, you know, all of his voices just correlated back to another set of characters. It is one that I would read again. It's one that I would actually buy the audiobook. This one I, again, checked out via Libby, and I 120% recommend. It is a darker subject matter, so enter upon your own risk. But I'd love to know what you think. I'd love to know if you have any comparable books. I did read, Kathleen Glasgow's Girl in Pieces, and there were a couple of others that I read that I didn't quite enjoy. I thought that they were less story and more message. Less commercial fiction, more literary. Very generalized review, but it is 1:30 and apparently I have a cold. So have a great day. Bye.